Alright, so now we've seen how for loops can be used to cycle through arrays. We'll see how we can do exactly the same thing with a while loop. And then we'll see a different example that shows the situation that you might prefer using a while loop rather than a for loop. So I'm going to take what we've got here and just turn it into a while loop first off from a for loop. And that should hopefully make it pretty clear how while loops work. So remember, with a for loop, we start off with stating that I is initially 0, and then we keep going as long as I is less than the number of tweets or the number of items in this array, and we increase I by 1 every time. So to do that with a while loop, we would set I to be 0 outside the loop this time, and then we get rid of our for instructions and replace that with a while, and then all we state in the definition of our loop is the condition for the while loop to continue. So while I is less than, and again, tweets dot length. So this will now keep going as long as I is less than tweets dot length. What we don't have yet is an instruction to increase I by 1 every time. And that is now a complete while loop, which will do exactly the same thing as the for loop that we had before. So let's just check. Yep, there we go. We get exactly the same output, but you can see the logic is a little bit different. We're defining our counter variable first, then we're saying keep going as long as our counter variable is less than this, and then each time the loop goes through, we're manually adding 1 to I. So it's the same thing, but structured slightly differently. I actually prefer while loops generally because they're a bit more flexible, but in most cases when you're using a for loop, you could use a while loop. It's up to you. So when might a while loop be a good idea? Well, to demonstrate that, I'm going to go back to our How Many Fingers app, but I'm going to turn it around. So instead of us guessing how many fingers the computer is holding up, the computer has to guess how many fingers we're holding up. And essentially, I'm going to set it up so we state how many fingers we're holding up, and then the computer keeps taking random guesses until it gets it right, and then it tells you how many guesses it took. So I'm going to set this as a optional challenge. So it's quite a tricky one, but we're not going to do any Googling. There's no new information here. It's just using while loops in a more advanced way. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video and give it a shot if you're feeling confident. All right, I hope that went well. Don't worry if it didn't, it was a tricky one, as I said. So I'm going to start by saying, how many fingers are you, that is the user of the website, holding up? And then we'll have an input with a type of text and an ID of, let's call it my number. And then a button that says guess. And we'll give that an ID of guess. That's it. So the idea is that we'll say 3 and then the computer will have to guess. So as usual, we want the action to commence when the guess button is pressed. So we'll set that up, document.getElementById, guess, and then we want to add an onClick to that, which is our usual function, and then curly brackets. And then I'm not going to do a check immediately this time because I'm pretty confident about that, but I'll set up a variable my number, which is going to equal whatever the user has entered. So that's going to be document.getElementById, and the ID is my number, and we want the value of that, as we've seen before. And I'm just going to alert my number, just because I don't want to do too much before we know that everything's set up okay. Brilliant. That's looking good. So now we're going to get the computer to choose a random number between 0 and 5. So we've done this before. So we'll call this guess, and that's initially going to be math.random. Then we multiply it by 6. And then we use math floor to make it a whole number between 0 and 5. Alright, then we want to do a check to see if the computer got it right. So if guess is equal to my number, then the computer got it right. So for now I'm just going to put a little comment in there saying computer is correct, else computer is wrong. So what we want to happen is we want this to go on and on and on until we get to here. The computer is correct. And then we want to tell the user how many goes it took. So what I'm going to do is set up a variable called GotIt. And this is going to be a new type of variable that we haven't seen before, which is called a Boolean. And a Boolean variable is either true or false. So initially, GotIt is false because the computer hasn't got it yet. And then when it has got it, we'll set GotIt to true. So this is the clever bit. We're going to keep going as long as GotIt is false. And we're actually going to keep doing all of this until GotIt is no longer false. So let's indent that so that we can see this is all part of the while loop. So remember, the computer gets it at this point if guess is equal to my number. So at this point, we will set GotIt is equal to true. And we also want to alert GotIt. And now if they're wrong, we want to just add 1 to the number of guesses so that we know how many guesses the computer has had. So let's set that number of guesses. So we'll start off at 1 because it's going to take the computer at least 1 guess. And then if the computer gets it wrong, we'll add 1 to the number of guesses. So take a moment just to see the logic of this. As long as GotIt is false, we're going to go round and round. Oh, in fact, there's a slight problem there because I closed my curly bracket. Yep, that's better. So as long as GotIt is false, we're going to go round and round, keep guessing until GotIt becomes true, and then we won't do it again. So you can hopefully see one big advantage of this is that while loops can have varying lengths. Now that is true for for loops as well, but while loops are kind of set up for that more naturally. So this is simply going to keep going until the computer gets it right. So let's just justify that we've got it right by telling the user what it was. So it was a, and then we could use either guess or my number here. They're both the same, doesn't really matter. I'll use guess. And then we need to say it took me, and then let's just expand this so we can see it clearly. Number of guesses. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to say GotIt, it was a, and then whatever the number was, it took me number of guesses. So let's have a look. I've done quite a lot there without checking, so fingers crossed it worked. So let's try 3 and guess. Got it. It was a 3. It took me 9 guesses. Sounds about right. 2. It took me 2 guesses. Excellent. So it looks like our system is working. Fantastic. All right. So that's how our while loop here works and how potentially it can go on until something happens. We don't necessarily have to state how many times it's going to happen in advance. It does give me the opportunity for a quick warning though. And when you use while loops like this, we need to be careful that our while loop is not going to potentially go on forever. Now, we're guessing continual random numbers here, but there's a very small possibility we could go on for ages and ages before the computer gets it right, but that's pretty unlikely and I'd be willing to let that go. But as we've got a free input here, the user could enter a 6, for example, and if we press guess now, something very bad is going to happen, and essentially what we've done is we've crashed the browser, because the computer's never going to get it, because the computer only guesses 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, so it's not going to guess 6. So we'd have to have a check in place. I'm just going to restart that page, hopefully it'll let me. But we should definitely have a check to make sure that the user has entered 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. There we go, it's even become unresponsive. Yikes, we definitely want to avoid that. So a better option here would be a drop down. So my final challenge for you for this video is to change the input to a drop down or a select, which only allows the user to enter 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. Go for it. All right, I hope you remembered how to do it. I have actually realized that I've forgotten to close the paragraph as well, so let's do that. So instead of an input, we're going to have a select. The ID will remain the same, but then we'll have our options. So we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's put those in. There we go, end the select, and then have our button. And I think we slightly need to actually put the paragraph down there. There we go. So let's take a look. This now is cleaner, and there should be no way that this should crash. One final way that you could be absolutely certain would be to have a check at some point to see if the number of guesses was bigger than 100 or something like that. And if that was the case, then something's probably gone wrong. That'd be a good way to make absolutely sure this thing wasn't going to crash. Alright, so that's a good use of while loops. You'll be pleased to hear that you've nearly made it to the end of the JavaScript section. We've got one more video on functions coming up next, and then we're going to be making our big JavaScript project, which is a reaction tester.